Welcome to the WRAL Daily Download. I'm Grace Holland. It's been just over a year since 3 men were found dead in a Durham hotel room with no cause ever given. Now we know those deaths were deemed overdoses from fentanyl, and that police are attempting to pursue death by distribution charges for whoever supplied those drugs. WRAL Investigates Sarah Krueger explains how that charge is causing an increase in workload for state medical examiners and one agency's unique approach to help alleviate that burden. Sarah, thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So how did this story come together?
So this is a case I've been following up on really since it happened, just checking in with Durham police and filing records requests. So some of those records I requested were 911 calls and autopsies, which I just recently got, and also a search warrant that I found. And all of those gave a lot of new information explaining that the 3 men who died from overdoses, according to the medical examiner's office, and fentanyl was a contributing cause to their death. And the 911 calls, those are so sad. They're loved ones of the victims who went into this hotel room looking for them after, not hearing from them, only to find them hunched over. And 4 people total were in there, 1 who ended up surviving, but the 3 who were already dead. And these are people who, according to the calls, worked in the construction industry and were staying at that hotel while they were working on a project. So the warrant showed that police are trying to pursue charges against whoever gave them the drugs.
Okay, and we know that overdoses are more common than we would like them to be here in North Carolina. What do those numbers show?
So the latest data from the state shows more than 3,000 North Carolinians died of an overdose last year in 2024, and more than half of those, just as of October of that year, involved fentanyl, as was the case in this Durham hotel situation as well. And that fentanyl crisis is one we've covered at WRAL extensively. In fact, our documentary team even did a whole documentary on it as well.
Right. And this death by distribution charge, I feel like I've been hearing more and more about that when we talk about how to address overdose deaths. What is that charge and how does it work?
So that's the charge that police are pursuing in this Durham case, according to that warrant. And it's a relatively new charge in North Carolina. It allows people who provide drugs that result in someone else's death to be held accountable criminally with that charge, with that pretty new charge just within the last few years. And we know from the State Department of Health and Human Services, which oversees the medical examiner's office, that the charge has led to a big increase in autopsy requests, because as these law enforcement officers, want to try to pursue whoever provided the drugs, they of course need the autopsy to show that it was in fact the drugs that caused the death.
Right. And, tangential to that, I would imagine there's a lot more evidence that officers probably have to build as well in terms of being able to prove that this was purchased from someone, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes. And my understanding from talking with various lawyers is that can be really hard to prove, and that, generally speaking, these tend to be quite complex cases for a number of reasons. I mean, in part because the victim is dead, and so that can make it harder to figure out who supplied the drugs. And then, also just proving that it was, in fact, the drugs that caused the death. There's just sort of a lot of hurdles to jump through to make this charge successful in prosecution.
Okay. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll talk about how this is specifically affecting those medical examiners. Sarah, before the break, you were explaining to us that the death by distribution charge is causing an increase in autopsy requests for the state medical examiner's office. How is that playing out?
So, yeah, we've reported in the past on how stretched thin the medical examiner's office is with a backlog of cases. And this is now one reason that is contributing to that. A spokesperson with the Department of Health and Human Services told me they've had more than a 30% increase in cases that they're doing from 2019 to 2023, which is attributed in part to the 69% increase they had in that time in suspected drug overdoses. And also, they are getting a lot of subpoenas to testify in court on cases. That takes a lot of time, takes them away from the office, sometimes for extended amounts of time, to be there physically in court to testify. And that includes testifying in cases for that death by distribution charge. And in addition to that charge really causing a backlog on the medical examiner's office, it's very multifaceted why they've gotten behind. But one recent thing they mentioned to me also is Hurricane Helene and all the work their office was called on to do for that, as just another thing that's increasing the strain that they're feeling and, just getting them even further behind.
And how are counties trying to address this? I think you have an example of one that's kind of creative.
Yeah, so Union County, which is near Charlotte, their sheriff's office told me that they wanted to be aggressive in pursuing these death by distribution charges. And, when there's a backlog and when there's a delay in getting autopsy results back, it delays the investigation. And of course, as time goes on with everything, it can just be more difficult to crack a case. So Union County did something unconventional and they opened their own autopsy center. So they worked with the state to get funding from the legislature, from lawmakers. They got more than $20 million to make this possible. And they opened it just a few months ago in December 2024. And I talked to the lieutenant at the sheriff's office for this story, and he was telling me that they're really seeing great results from this. It helps them speed up the prosecution of these cases and, just really helps them get justice more quickly for families. Eventually, they hope to expand their center and the services it offers and what it can do and serve even more counties and help them alleviate the burden on the state medical examiner's office. They hope to serve eventually 9 different counties in the area.
Yeah, that's really interesting to look at going forward, is whether this is going to become sort of a new model there for the state. Now, of course, in the meantime, we do still have that backlog, these things being slowed down. So where does that Durham case stand, and are there any charges filed?
So the search warrant showed that the Durham police were going through the cell phones of the victims, trying to gain access to them, trying to, see what clues they may provide that could help them in this case as they try to pursue death by distribution charges. But at last check with Durham police, so far, no charges have been filed.
Well, thank you so much, Sarah. We appreciate it. And thank you for listening to the WRAL Daily Download. Another great way to get WRAL news is the Morning Briefing newsletter. That's a daily email with Triangle news, events, and headlines to help you get ready for the day. Sign up at WRAL.com/newsletter.